last class. Okay, I have taken leave for almost 2 weeks. Okay, so in the last class, I think I have done up to ER. We have started a little bit. I think we have started what is ER, entity relationship. Okay, we have started these things. I think entity relationship model. Okay, ER. Then the definition of the ER and the symbols of ER we have done. Okay, symbols of ER, like if the entity is there, then how to represent the entity, what will be the symbol of the entity. Sound di tabra noi kamai tawi sound tapra yabra.
Yeah, ma'am.
Yai ka. So last time what we have discussed is the symbol of the ER. So the rectangular box is represented for the entity. Okay, and sometimes it is also known as the strong entity. जो दम high and khale high na dum when masi representation just mane strong entity ga entity ga. So entity has two types. First one is strong entity. Second one is weak entity. For koi tawgre weak entity the how to represent it with the double rectangular box na represent the way high just canonical revision hypet have the almost 2 weeks to dramnina hypet revision na mate ma one na then what this diamond box represents, that is the relationship. Okay, then double diamond box identifying relationship or weak relationship, sometimes it represent. Then the how to represent the attribute. How to represent the attribute with the oval or ellipse. Ovals are high sometimes, or sometimes ellipse are high ko, represented with the ellipse symbol. If the attribute in the attribute, if there is an underline inside that attribute, then that is called the key attribute. Key attribute means the primary key. Okay, then the another one is multi-valued attribute. That means the attribute which have more than one value. Multi means more than one value. Like for example, phone number. Student can have, every person can have more than one phone number. So in that case, how to represent that phone number in the ER diagram? We can represent using the double ellipse sign, that is known as the multi-valued attribute. If the person is having only one phone number, then simply we can represent like this. If the person is having more than one phone number, then in the table, in the database, we can store more than one phone number. If the person is having more than one phone number, then we can store all of them. In that case, in the ER diagram, we have to represent like this, double with the double ellipse. Okay, then composite attribute. Composite attribute means the attribute which can be further subdivided. Attribute but that means like name. Name, we can have first name, middle name, last name, like that. Or address. Address, we can have the address 1, address 2, or address 3, like pin code, city, then state, like that. We can further subdivide it. Those type of attribute is known as the composite attribute. Derived attribute, it is represented with the dotted line. Okay, dotted attribute, dotted ellipse. Derived attribute means, derived means which is going to take from based on another attribute. That is the derived from the other attribute, like you can say age. Age we can derive from the date of birth of a person. So in that case, the age is known as the derived attribute. Okay, so these things we are going to give the definition. Along with the definition definition let's do the definition one by one. Like here, what is the attribute? From the beginning, from the first class of Dbms, we have talking about the attribute, what is attribute, what is column, what is row, then the what do we call the row in another name, then what is the another name of the column. Okay, row means, I am also repeating again and again in every class, row we used to call it tuple or record. Okay, then attribute means column. Okay, column or field or domain. Okay, so attribute, what is the definition of the attribute? That means the attribute means the property of an entity. Property means the characteristics of an entity. Entity means entity can be a person, it can be a place, it can be a concept. Okay, we have already given the what is entity, right? So okay, we have already given the definition of entity. Let's have a quick look. What is the entity? Here, an entity may be an object, class, person, or the place. In the ER diagram, an entity can be represented as rectangles. Okay, entity means it can be object or class or okay, then person or place or examples of entities the high employee, student, patient, placed in a store, building, object, machine, product and car, event, sale, registration, renewal, concept, account, course. These can be the example of the, these are the example of the entity. Okay, so attribute means the property of an entity or the characteristic of an entity. So here the definition is given like this: the attribute is used to describe the property of an entity. Okay, entity amagi property to describe taunaba sizinaba adubu, that is called the attribute. Attribute can be represented by an ellipse sign or by an oven. Sida ina just round oigara si ellipse ki form da dum ye uko akiyekpade. So example, the student entity can have ID, contact number. Here, ID, phone number, age, and the name. These are the property of an entity name student. These are called the attributes of the student entity. The attribute can be further divided into many types. Okay, attribute, simple attribute or atomic attribute, then key attribute, composite attribute, then single valued attribute, multi-valued attribute, then derive and store attribute. Okay, like this we can divide in many forms. The first one, that is simple attribute or atomic attribute. Atomic hai tadi kaino simple hai kaino, that means icham chamba hai bane simple hai tadi, or atomic haragadi atom hai di koina apikpa pot ama molecule atom kai je khara apikpa pot ama gi type ta construct khanai ko, like that. An attribute which cannot be further subdivided into components is called a simple or atomic attribute. Simple or atomic attribute haina khaneba, further subdivided tau yadraba ko amona thugaiba yadraba, like roll number. Can you divide roll number again into small pieces? Yagadra. Then gender is the man and female, man or female haraktoini. Gender is khona amu thugaiba yabra yaroi. My age he's like 27 haro 27 do amu thugaiba yagadra, like ming name haraga khoina like first name, second the middle name, third name the mai thugaiba yaba the maina. Roll numbers we cannot further subdivide it, okay, into small pieces. That means that is the last or the simplest or the smallest attribute or in a part or in a adugumba makhangi attribute to that is called the simple or atomic attribute. Example, the now we can say the roll number of a student, the ID of an employee. This cannot be further subdivided. These are called the simple or atomic attribute. Okay, the second one is key attribute. Key. What is mean by the key? Key means very important characteristics or the main characteristic, or suppose like in the person we used to say he is a key person. That means he is the most important person we are saying. Like that in the attribute also, if the attribute is taking the role of very important characteristic, then that is called the key attribute. Like you can say like roll number. Suppose student, if we know the student roll number, then we can easily find out his class, then the age, his class, then the which semester. Like suppose in your case MCA, if we know the roll number, then we can find out your name, then we can find out your details, right? Which year you are doing, which year you have done the MCA, and now you are in which semester. Those things we can find out very easily if we know the roll number. Suppose if name, let's say name, if we know your name, then it will be very difficult to find out your details. Like there may be many students having the same name, like Tomba can have in another class also. Tomba can be in another class also, like in second semester or in third semester, like that. So it is very difficult to find out the by knowing the name of a student. So that cannot be the key characteristics. Like that, we cannot take the name as a key attribute. Okay, so suppose if you are going to make a table, or you are going to consider a table, then you can think of which column can be the key attribute, or which column can be the key column. Those things you have to think very carefully. So key attribute means the key attribute is used to represent the main characteristic of an entity. It represents a primary key. Primary key attribute means primary key. Never, sometimes it is known as the primary key. The key attribute is represented by an ellipse with the text underlined. Okay, magi symbol identify very easily identify taunabagi magi extra feature am yawi, that is the key attribute to adugi makada underline sing never. So symbol that we can easily find out in this student entity. Here we are having 4 attributes: roll number, age, date of birth, gender, and the roll number is the key attribute by seeing this diagram, because roll number is here underlined. Okay, so we can easily find out this is the symbol of the key attribute. Next, composite attribute. Composite means compose. It comes from the word compose. That means compose means it can be more than one. Okay, combination. Okay, like that. So an attribute that composed of many other attribute is known as a composite attribute, or in other word you can say like simple attribute means amon thugai be yadraba habani unique magi parto kano to thugai be yadraba amon father subdivided small pieces to thugai be yadraba habani. Then composite sig ani je opposite ni ko simple attribute and the composite attributes are opposite to each other. Like suppose composite means it can be further subdivided. You can give the definition like this also: an attribute which can be further subdivided into smaller attribute. is called sumana definition pirasu yai ko composite attribute sumana hasu yai definition manai sida an attribute that composed of many other attribute haije mayam am punjalaga saba haiba opposite akoina wahi do atobo mawong amdaju attribute to macha macha thonga thugai ba yaba that means mayam punjalaga sari neba ko definition do nang can be further subdivided into other attribute haigera or smaller attribute haigera other hasijina ro wahi jama the other attribute okay is known as composite attribute like example I nang sa have do example like say name je koina it can be further subdivided as first name middle name last name this type of attribute is known as the composite attribute okay then or simply form the simple form that you can nan kamai hai joy branches ko my branches laiba has joy ko branches ai bo ai do khangna bugi wani je definition de ha punu kana roi number 3 the single valued attribute single valued single id only one ko valued id my value laiba do ko only one value attribute have ne isam samba have the only one valued attribute have ne because single valued attribute have the that means the attribute which takes up only a single value for its entity instance is called a single valued attribute. Or in other words, you can say an attribute which have only one value that is called only one or single value that is called a single valued attribute. Advaina has UI. Example the age. Me magi age bu sahi 28 chure 27 chure haina ani laiba yabra ne. Yade ko only one value. Okay. Aduduna age of an student is the in this case in this diagram the student entity is having four attribute the single valued which one is a single valued attribute that is the age is a single valued attribute okay date of birth single value attribute oibedi yai adubu age ga manipur gi case ta haragadi age ga date of birth ka je manipur gi di academic age dana ama I pokpadana ama I koina adadi single value haiba yagadra du case dia date of birth mi khudima date of birth only one date of birth like gadam neba adubu akhoi gi manipur gi haitare baroina manipur gi chanari ji di mi khudima date of birth ani lairamani chahi jo ani loi suramani manipur dadi subra sudabra
sui ma'am
ko adadi adugi case di adu khoi general oiba wafam di natte haba manipur khadangi wane ba do aduduna example si dum pigi bwane ado noina wakhanda jo adum khanbadi ya ba manipur dadi SB khudingi chahi ani sure academic tana ai tamna ha academic tana 2000 da poe khalo adagi asengba original dana 98 ta poe adudi ma chahi ani sudra adumaina manipur dadi ani lai ko adu tok thokro adu just aina kaino oina haiba wani ado asengba kaino oina di lawba yade adu adugi wajing dudi aduna single value attribute haita di samna haida magi age gumba date of birth gumba single value attribute ni adagi gender daju hujikti gender daju ahum sure ko gender daju aduna si gender dadi yara roi sida age da oina sida haire magi single value attribute multi valued haita di that means the attribute which have multiple values or which can take multiple values that is called the multi-valued attribute okay no definition to na nasagi own definition pirazu yai ko magi maming jida dum khango ba multiple means multi-valued attribute means attribute which have more than one value or which take more than one value have an agent so the main definition genen but minus sense the pirazu yai ka sukai idea or definition COP ka sukai no apamani adubo idea adu di khango haba an attribute can have more than one value. These attributes are also known as multi-valued attribute. Multi-valued attribute that is represented by double ellipse or double oval. Okay, ellipse sometimes in some other book it may be oval or in some other book the symbol may be ellipse. Don't get confused. Ellipse or oval jedum haina bawahini. Adosidana multiple value lani isam samna have the like phone number, email ID. Meaning email ID, multiple email ID. One person can have multiple EID and the multiple phone number. This type of attribute we represent in the ER diagram using the double ellipse sign, that is known as the double ellipse symbol, that is known as the multi-valued attribute. In this example, we have the mobile number and the email ID are the multi-valued attribute. Okay. Next, the derive attribute and store attribute. Derive and store, we have to define both together at the same time. Okay. When definition piba matamda mafam jagan to same time the piu ko kay have kan the derive attribute have je derive kay gumba ma degi derive tong doini, that means kay gumba ma degi refer to doini ba ko ma je. The derive an attribute that can be derived from other attribute is known as the derived attribute. That means it's going to differ from other attribute based on other attribute. Have isan samna masa mathandana mi kaino hai tare sam thandana magi value do piba ngamdaba atoba the base ro derive ro atoba the base ro ga magi value do phangadaba. Like example sahi hai ro sahi ji nanga mingi sahi ji exact heta ubada haiba ngambra ngamde kaigino the magi date of birth khangagadi mi du sahi exact haiba ngami aduduna the age of a person is derived from the date of birth of that person. Okay, age is changed over time, age is changed, but date of birth it never changed. Okay, based on that date of birth, we can calculate the age of a person. So the age is the derived attribute and date of birth store attribute. Okay, si makhangelo si confuse pani yamna derive ka store attribute ka che baiba gumda ju am hangbani derive attribute and kamai define tawduno store attribute and kamai define tawduno have the quite best example the age ka date of birth kani. The age is going to calculate based on the date of birth. Then the age is the derived attribute because it depends on the date of birth. Date of birth ma depend tarogane ma holai do. Then the date of birth to the that is the store attribute lakane ba date of birth to the change taroi mangon the store taroga sahi the laibe mong the tawi haduna, that is called as the store attribute. Aduna say the derived attribute to derived attribute kaina represent tawi magi kaino jiju magi symbol ji yangu. It can be represented by dash ellipse or dotted ellipse has you ko dotted ellipse has you magi dot sisina represent tawni ko the dot se represent tawbje sina strong entity ko or entity oibagi mangna sije dot represent tawbje nangna seida kaino haibawani derived attribute haibani weak entity the double quoted tawramaga tawramta di ko adadi dot tawbje maji ke haini adana underline ga tawramadi mada percent ki haraktoini ko adu tongan to khoro hojiki oina di derived attribute is represented by dotted line. Okay, dotted ellipse sign. Yare sibo yare. Then next to the relationship. Okay, relationship. Attribute gyanta adra. Attribute kai confusion lady. Attribute ki matang loy khangadra noy. Yes, no.
Khangani
ko mane isam samba lai ju lai ba definition suma je pekhada jo hangbani ko e ado dum khangjal ho ya lai na magi maming du de dum definition pi be abani. Next relationship. Relationship haibadi kaino entity and maga entity amaga ani dugi marakta laiba link. Okay, adi kari base tawraga kari this background the karamba background the mo inji relate lere ino relation lere ino haibagi dugi represent tawnabagi symbol ama sizinai diamond box na, that is called the relationship between the two entities haiba the haijiyong a relationship is used to describe the relation between two entities. Entity anigi relation do define tawnabagi damakta relationship haibaje wahaije sizinai ni si kaina represent tawi, that is denoted by diamond box, diamond or rhombus. So haika is used to represent the relationship. Suppose we have an entity teacher have entity mlaide chije akoina database da oina utadi kai hana table oina software da utadi table oina laktoini ko teacher table oina laktoini sidi conceptual design ni akoina ER diagram kai logical design ni ko habi design oina utpado logical or conceptual kaina ngasai gi level ama haigi keno daga haigi bodo 3 tier architecture ka da have the conceptual kind of palidana ꯁꯤꯗꯤ ꯀꯟꯁꯦꯞꯆꯨꯋꯦꯜ ꯉꯥꯛꯇꯅꯤ ꯑꯁꯦꯡꯕꯗꯤ ꯀꯩꯅꯣ ꯅꯠꯇꯦ ꯑꯦꯛꯆꯨꯑꯦꯂꯤ ꯀꯩꯅꯣ ꯇꯧꯕꯗꯤ ꯅꯠꯇꯦꯀꯣ ꯏꯝꯄ꯭ꯂꯤꯃꯦꯟ ꯇꯧꯕꯗꯤ ꯅꯠꯇꯦ ꯖꯁ ꯃꯥꯒꯤ ꯁ꯭ꯀꯤꯃꯥꯒꯤ ꯇꯥꯏꯞ ꯉꯥꯛꯇꯅꯤ ꯀꯣ ꯁ꯭ꯀꯤꯝ ꯔꯤꯄ꯭ꯔꯖꯦꯟ ꯇꯥꯏ ꯗꯤꯖꯥꯏꯟꯗꯨ ꯉꯥꯛꯇꯅꯤꯀꯣ ꯁꯤꯗ ꯇꯧꯔꯤꯁꯦ ꯑꯗꯨꯒ ꯇꯤꯆꯔ ꯍꯥꯏꯕꯁꯤ ꯑꯦꯟꯇꯤꯇꯤ ꯑꯃ ꯂꯩꯔꯦ ꯗꯦꯟ ꯁ꯭ꯇꯨꯗꯦꯟ ꯍꯥꯏꯕ ꯑꯦꯟꯇꯤꯇꯤ ꯑꯃ ꯂꯩꯔꯦ ꯑꯗꯣ ꯑꯅꯤꯁꯤ ꯔꯤꯂꯦꯁꯟ ꯂꯥꯛꯇꯣꯏꯅꯤ ꯍꯥꯏꯗꯤ ꯇꯦꯕꯜ ꯑꯃꯒ ꯅꯪ ꯗꯇꯥꯕꯦꯁꯇ ꯂꯤꯡ ꯂꯥꯛꯇꯣꯏꯅꯤ ꯀꯣ ꯀꯔꯤ ꯃꯑꯣꯡꯗ ꯂꯤꯡ ꯂꯥꯛꯀꯦ ꯍꯥꯏ ꯀꯥꯟꯗ ꯇꯤꯆꯔ ꯍꯥꯏꯕꯁꯤ ꯀꯩꯅꯣ ꯇꯤꯆꯔ ꯁ꯭ꯇꯨꯗꯦꯟ ꯇꯤꯆꯔꯗꯨꯅ ꯁ꯭ꯇꯨꯗꯦꯟꯗꯨ ꯇꯤꯆ ꯇꯧꯔꯤꯅꯤ ꯁꯤꯒꯤ ꯋꯥꯍꯩꯁꯤꯗꯤ ꯅꯣꯏꯅ ꯍꯥꯞꯅꯤꯡꯕ ꯍꯥꯞꯄ ꯌꯥꯏꯀꯣ ꯃꯣꯏꯒꯤ ꯔꯤꯂꯦꯁꯟꯒꯤ ꯃꯃꯤꯡꯗꯣ ꯁ꯭ꯄꯦꯁꯤꯐꯤꯛꯁꯤ ꯍꯥꯞꯀꯗꯕꯅꯤ ꯍꯥꯏꯕ ꯂꯩꯇꯦ ꯅꯪꯒꯤ ꯀꯩꯅꯣꯗꯨꯒꯤ ꯆꯥꯟꯅꯅ ꯅꯪꯒꯤ ꯇꯧꯒꯗꯕ ꯌꯦꯛꯀꯗꯕ ꯗꯥꯏꯒ꯭ꯔꯥꯝꯗꯨꯒꯤ ꯆꯥꯟꯅꯅ ꯅꯪꯅ ꯋꯥꯍꯩꯗꯨ ꯍꯥꯞꯄ ꯌꯥꯏ ꯋꯥꯔꯛꯁ ꯐꯣꯔ ꯑꯗꯨꯝ ꯍꯥꯏ ꯋꯥꯔꯛꯁ ꯑꯣꯟ ꯀꯥꯏꯅ ꯑꯗꯨꯝ ꯁꯤꯖꯤꯟꯅꯕ ꯌꯥꯏꯕꯀꯣ ꯑꯗꯨꯗꯨꯅ ꯇꯤꯆꯔ ꯁ꯭ꯇꯨꯗꯦꯟ ꯇꯤꯆꯔꯅ ꯁ꯭ꯇꯨꯗꯦꯟ ꯇꯝꯕꯤ ꯗꯦꯠ ꯃꯤꯟꯁ ꯔꯤꯂꯦꯁꯟꯁꯤꯞ ꯏꯁ ꯇꯤꯆꯦꯁ ꯍꯥꯏꯅꯦꯕ ꯃꯣꯏ ꯑꯅꯤꯒꯤꯁꯦꯀꯣ ꯑꯗ ꯀꯩꯅꯣꯒꯤ ꯃꯥꯒꯤ ꯔꯤꯂꯦꯁꯟꯁꯤꯞꯀꯤ ꯃꯈꯜ ꯃꯌꯥꯝ ꯑꯃ ꯂꯩ ꯏꯁꯝ ꯁꯝꯅ ꯍꯥꯏꯔꯕ 1-to-1 ꯀꯣ 1:1 ꯑꯩ ꯁ꯭ꯋꯥꯏꯗ ꯍꯥꯟꯅ ꯏꯊꯣꯛꯀꯦ ꯆꯥꯎꯔꯥꯛꯄ ꯑꯃ ꯔꯤꯂꯦꯁꯟ ꯃꯈꯜꯁꯤ ꯑꯦꯗ 1:1 ꯍꯣꯔꯦꯟ ꯃꯃꯤꯡ ꯊꯥꯔꯔꯣꯏꯒꯦ ꯑꯩ ꯅꯣꯏ ꯑꯗꯨꯝ ꯀꯩꯅꯣ ꯇꯧ 1:m 1-to-many ꯍꯥꯏꯕ ꯑꯦꯝꯁꯤ ꯀꯦꯄꯤꯇꯦꯜ ꯑꯣꯏꯕ ꯌꯥꯏ ꯑꯣꯔ ꯏꯟ ꯁꯝ ꯑꯗꯔ ꯕꯨꯛ 1:n ꯒ ꯍꯥꯏꯔꯝꯕꯁꯨ ꯌꯥꯏ ꯀꯩꯁꯨ ꯀꯥꯏꯗꯦꯀꯣ 1-to-many ꯍꯥꯏꯅꯤ ꯑꯗ m:1 many-to-1 ꯍꯥꯏꯕ then 3 m:m many-to-many or in some other book n:n ꯒ ꯍꯥꯏꯕꯅꯤ ꯀꯩꯁꯨ ꯀꯥꯏꯗꯦ first one ꯗ 1:1 ꯍꯥꯏꯕꯗꯤ ꯔꯤꯂꯦꯁꯟ one is both side ꯃꯥꯒꯤ instance 1-1 ꯑꯣꯏꯕ that means suppose sida haraji 1:1 relation ni harase da person has passport mi khudingi magi passport chi amamam khata lai ko passport hai ta di khoina passport saba ka haibdu ko mapan chatnabagi passport saba idu mingi passport ani leiba yabra ne yade ko aduna ke hagide da person has only one passport ko magi kamane interpret tawni haije 1:1 sida mi amagi magi passport se amakhakta lei passport si kanagi oino mi am khatagini sumaina both way de represent tawba ngamna ba hono ko id passport has passport gi owner do amakhatang oigadamne ba passport amagi mai owner mayam leibra yabra ne yade aduna both side gi 1:1 moini gi kenoje definition na kamai pini when a single instance of an entity is associated with a single instance of another entity, then it is called one-to-one relationship. For example, say that we have two entities, person and the passport, and their relationship is has. That means how to interpret it, how to explain it. A person has only one passport, and a passport to one or a one passport a passport is given to only one person. Okay. Ado mi amagi passport amakaka lay passport amadugi mapu haigera adagi passport amakata do kanada pini mi imkhatangi ni oidoido passport angi mapu mayam oiba yade adumaina interpret tawgodabo ko adagi one to many haitadi amaga mayam amga relationship ko that means samna haibda sida teacher hairo ko sida scientist haire an example scientist amana harakadaba sida one scientist ko can invent many inventions ma invention mayam puthokpa yaina asumba fact su oigadamni ko hari chanaba sa khoi chanaba chanadaba ju yengadamni scientist amana mana invention mayam am puthokpa yai invention mayam do kanana puthoino scientist amana sumaina both side gi halak meaning do halakna bo honagadaba consider kamai definition pini when only one instance of the entity on the left side more than one instance of the entity on the right associate with the relationship, then it is called one to many. Okay, or you can say like the definition when a single instance of an entity is associated with many instance of another entity harakadaba siga same definition samana pige haragana adamaina pirasu yai ko aina atop definition amada sida ire do junoina pasibha pubu nungaina ba or khangba nungaina ba haita di instance haita di kaino ngahan instance of a dbms kaina ga tamgadai instance haidi ke habno ningjang bra instance ningjang da bro instance haidi magi particular time amada magi database da table da labor record to aduni samna haibada ngasi nangi table gi database da nangi table student table da record tara laire that means instance of the table student at 2:30 p.m. is 10 records hagadaba then pung manga da horen pung manga da suppose nang record khra mu injal leba hana record tara leba dudi gi nang na record 10 amga more amu hapsal leba that means instance of the database at 5 p.m. is 20 records hagadaba wa the man instance haita di matang matungina change tawi database da leba magi record to buni wa record to magi row do number of row kya lege have da duni duma se instance haita single instance haita di single keno amakal lay hamni mi amakhatani ko single instance haita di then many haita di many haita di magi invention to mayam ama adumaina ko scientists can invent many inventions scientists can invent many inventions but the invention is done by only one specific scientist adu invention mayam do konan puthoino scientist ama khona puthokpani yare ko sumaina that means my relationship to one is to many lakwa amaga mayam ka scientist amana invention mayam puthoe adu invention mayam dudi kanana puthoino scientist amana puthokpani sumaina interpretation do main pigidaba many to one hargana sida aina pijung student study college ko entity ani laire student haibamga college haibamga moni relationship je student hare student study at college ta mini student je adudi sida m la adi kai no kai hanang interpretation ji kamai pini many student study at one college koi college da elite student mayam amatami koi college the only one that is known as nilit hari neba kwasino one way laire adagi nilit opposite way da mukai hage da college amada that is the nilit da gi student mayam ama lay haite ba suna kan opposite la kana kwasida haje more than one instance of an entity is associated with a single instance of another entity that is called the many to one relationship example the many student can study in a single college but student cannot study in many colleges at the same time haije sai student mayam dadi atopa college at the same time the college atopa mayam tambaya dena dumaina many to one la ko sina relationship se then atopa amana many to many haita di kaino mayam ama that means adai kai haila ani seida many to one ohen many to many ohen ba yabra many to many ohen ba yabra sije rule gi matung ina di yade ko noi gi admission da khoin haidra chhatra mana university gi makhada different course to ba yade na hai adubu ti rule je seng budi thugayeba koisadi haidi akoi se juming chanjalamani adobu college juming chanba mayam yaure ko adugi case di many to many laktoiba adubu general oina rule gi matung ina di kaino da chhatra mayam ama college amda college mayam nang many ohen ge haita di chhatra mayam ama haita ba seda m lakta di chhatra mayam many student can study at many college harakta ba m la hapsala adubu actual da aseng budi adu oithokpa yabra yade ko ꯑꯗꯨꯗꯤ ꯑꯩꯈꯣꯏꯅ ꯈꯪꯖꯕ ꯋꯥꯅꯤ ꯑꯩꯈꯣꯏꯒꯤ ꯀꯦꯁꯇꯗꯤ ꯀꯣ ꯑꯗꯨꯃꯥꯏꯅ ꯑꯁꯦꯡꯕ ꯔꯤꯌꯦꯂꯤꯇꯤꯗ ꯀꯝꯄꯦꯌꯔ ꯇꯧꯒꯗꯕꯅꯤꯀꯣ ꯅꯪꯅ ꯄꯨꯏꯗ ꯏꯁꯟꯕ ꯌꯥꯗꯦꯕ ꯑꯗꯣ ꯁꯤꯗ ꯍꯥꯏꯁꯤꯗ ꯃꯦꯅꯤ ꯇꯨ ꯃꯦꯅꯤ ꯍꯥꯏꯇꯥꯔꯗꯤ ꯁꯝꯅ ꯍꯥꯏꯔꯕꯗ ꯑꯩꯈꯣꯏ ꯅꯤꯂꯤꯠꯇ ꯍꯥꯏꯔꯣ ꯁꯤꯗ ꯅꯤꯂꯤꯠꯇ ꯁꯤ ꯏꯝꯄ꯭ꯂꯣꯌꯤ ꯍꯥꯏꯔꯣ ꯅꯠꯇ꯭ꯔꯒ ꯐꯦꯀꯜꯇꯤ ꯍꯥꯏꯔꯣ ꯃꯣꯏꯁꯦ ꯁꯤ ꯑꯩꯅ ꯄꯤꯁꯤ ꯇꯣꯛꯑꯁꯦ ꯐꯦꯀꯜꯇꯤ is assigned to many class ꯍꯥꯏꯔꯣ ꯁꯤꯗ ꯀꯣ ꯑꯩꯅ ꯁꯤꯗ ꯏꯝꯄ꯭ꯂꯣꯌꯤꯁꯤꯅ ꯐꯦꯀꯜꯇꯤ ꯍꯥꯏꯔꯒꯦ or taking class 하야게요. 지금 meaning지나 taking class sorry thesis 하야지바 ko faculty thesis in many class aina se project ki mota class oreba employee entity ani laire employee haibamga class haibamga moini ki relationship na thesis tambi hayagadi aduju yayeba habdi employee faculty mayam ama lay akoida mayam jina tambiri student class mayam amda ko haidi isam samna habda ai noida huzik MSc da changi ai example boba ai many to many ne ba ai huzik relation student ga relationship che or class ga relationship che nang the faculty ga student ga oigera or faculty ga class ga oigera adoi tadi faculty je ai samang ni laure adada many faculty mayam ama lay khoida ai ju lay atopa mi ju lay ko many faculty mayam amna teaches many courses harak pa ju yaiba habde noi class ta ai ju changi ko adagi sai mob sik chu changi adagi madam ibm cha ju changi sir syam ju changi adagi sir dinamani ju changi madam kano ju changi shobna ju changi that means many teacher haigera faculty haigera em la ani do di many hanna teaches okay the courses different courses hai different means em la ani da ju ko do ta di MCA da ju change MSc da ju change dagi even PGDC da ju change BCA da ju change adu case ta dum apply to ba ya ba khoi se ju dumaina many to many hadi relationship to mayam da lei ba hai ba ko when more than one instance of the entity on the left ka loi to thokro more than one instance of an entity on the right associate with the relationship, then it is known as the many-to-many relationship definition. The same definition pi haragadi si ama khatang khango one instance of an entity associated with a single instance of another entity. My haiba dumaina samana seju when semdora gay when only one instance when only one or when a single higera only one instance of an entity is mana samana iro dum kasukari no pekhara ju even nungai na ba jimpa pobu nungai na ba is associated with more than one instance of another entity then it is known as one to many relationships. My hide them yare samana when only one instance of an entity. So mana period definition of wahijing on an entity is associated with more than one instance of another entity, then it is known as the one to many relationship. Many to one. When more than one instance of an entity is associated with the single instance of another entity, then it is called as the many to one. When more than one instance of an entity, so mana PhD definition je ko wahai je of an entity is associated with more than one instance of an entity, then it is known as the many to many relationship. Yare. My period definition. Dikhangadra relationship kise haying diagram ya diagram ye pukanda ida magi coordinate ratio kawi sije magi 1:1 1:m m:1 m:m kaje si coordinate ratio kawi adu sije hapu coordinate ratio hapu u ka haidi si labeling tobu matamda yekku matamda si hakodaba ko khangadro se khangadra khangoidra
khangni
khangni ko like taju hypeti yengu example atop sije adum sometimes ko ngauba yaubani ado like ta toroga adum example sina taba atop da try tau yengu adum any example ama lauraga adum try tau yengu haidi relationship to satisfy oibra oidabra habdo ꯕꯣꯠ ꯋꯦꯁꯇꯒꯤ ꯑꯣꯏꯒꯗꯕꯅꯤ ꯑꯗꯣ ꯍꯥꯏꯐꯦꯠ ꯈꯜꯂꯒ ꯌꯦꯡꯉꯣ ꯑꯗꯨꯒ ꯑꯗꯨꯝ ꯌꯦꯛꯊꯣꯛ ꯌꯦꯛꯁꯤꯟ ꯁꯥꯟꯅꯧ ꯁꯤꯃ ꯁꯤ ꯍꯌꯦꯡ ꯑꯗꯨꯝ ꯁꯤ ꯑꯗꯨꯝ ꯀꯩꯅꯣꯗ ꯏ ꯑꯥꯔ ꯗꯥꯏꯒ꯭ꯔꯥꯝꯗ ꯑꯗꯨꯝ ꯁꯤꯖꯤꯟꯅꯗꯧ ꯂꯩꯔꯕꯅꯤ ꯌꯥꯔꯦ ꯉꯁꯤꯒꯤꯗꯤ ꯁꯤꯐꯧ ꯇꯧꯔꯁꯤꯀꯣ ꯁꯤꯐꯧ ꯇꯧꯔꯁꯤ ꯅꯣꯏ ꯃꯤꯁꯤ ꯌꯥꯝꯗ꯭ꯔꯤꯁꯦ ꯅꯣꯏꯁꯦ ꯀꯩꯅꯣꯒꯤ ꯑꯦꯝ ꯁꯤ ꯑꯦꯒꯤ ꯃꯤ ꯀꯌꯥꯝ ꯌꯥꯎꯏ ꯑꯜꯕꯔꯠ ꯅꯪ ꯑꯦꯝ ꯁꯤꯔꯥ ꯑꯦꯝ ꯑꯦꯁ ꯁꯤꯔꯥ ꯑꯦꯝ ꯁꯤ ꯑꯦ ꯑꯗꯒꯤ ꯆꯟꯗ꯭ꯔꯤꯀꯥꯗꯤ ꯆꯟꯗ꯭ꯔꯤꯀꯥ ꯑꯦꯝ ꯁꯤ ꯑꯦ ꯀꯣ ꯑꯗꯒꯤ ꯆꯤꯡꯈꯩ ꯑꯦꯝ ꯁꯤ ꯑꯦ ꯑꯗꯒꯤ ꯄꯣꯂꯤꯟꯗꯤ ꯑꯦꯝ ꯑꯦꯁ ꯁꯤꯔꯥ
ꯃꯥꯅꯦ ꯃꯦꯝ
ꯑꯗꯒꯤ
ꯑꯩ
ꯀꯕꯤꯇꯥ
ꯑꯦꯝ ꯁꯤ ꯑꯦꯅꯦ ꯃꯦꯝ
ꯑꯗꯒꯤ ꯁꯨꯕꯥꯁꯤꯅꯤ ꯑꯗꯒꯤ ꯅꯁꯤꯔ ꯑꯦꯝ ꯁꯤ ꯑꯦ ꯑꯗꯒꯤ ꯁꯗꯅꯥ
ꯑꯦꯝ ꯑꯦꯁ ꯁꯤ ꯑꯥꯏ ꯇꯤꯅꯦ ꯃꯦꯝ
ꯑꯦꯝ ꯑꯦꯁ ꯁꯤ ꯑꯥꯏ ꯇꯤ ꯀꯣ ꯁꯨꯁꯥꯅꯥ
ꯑꯦꯝ ꯑꯦꯁ ꯁꯤ ꯑꯥꯏ ꯇꯤꯅꯦ ꯃꯦꯝ
ꯑꯗꯒꯤ ꯄꯤꯡꯀꯤ
ꯑꯦꯝ ꯁꯤ ꯑꯦꯅꯦ
ꯄꯤꯡꯀꯤꯁꯦ ꯄꯤꯡꯀꯤ ꯀꯩꯅꯣꯗꯨꯔꯣ ꯄꯤꯡꯀꯤ ꯑꯃ ꯄꯤꯡꯀꯤꯁꯦ ꯀꯔꯝꯕ ꯄꯤꯡꯀꯤꯅꯣ
ꯃꯦꯝ ꯕꯤ ꯁꯤ ꯑꯦꯒꯤꯅꯦꯕꯀꯣ
ꯎꯝ
ꯑꯗꯣ ꯑꯃ ꯖꯤꯔꯤꯒꯤꯗꯣ ꯑꯗꯨꯗꯤ ꯅꯠꯇꯦ
ꯑꯣ ꯑꯗꯨꯅꯦ ꯍꯥꯏꯁꯦ ꯑꯩꯅ ꯀꯔꯝꯕ ꯄꯤꯡꯀꯤꯅꯣ ꯍꯪꯉꯤꯁꯦ
ꯎꯝ
ꯑꯗꯒꯤ ꯌꯥꯏꯐꯕ ꯌꯥꯏꯐꯕꯁꯨ ꯑꯦꯝ ꯁꯤ ꯑꯦ ꯑꯦꯝ ꯑꯦꯁ ꯁꯤ ꯑꯥꯏ ꯇꯤ ꯃꯤ ꯑꯍꯨꯝ ꯈꯛꯇꯅꯦ ꯌꯥꯎꯔꯤꯁꯦ ꯑꯦꯝ ꯑꯦꯁ ꯁꯤ ꯑꯥꯏ ꯇꯤꯁꯦ ꯀꯩꯗꯧꯔꯒꯦ ꯅꯣꯏ ꯃꯤ ꯌꯥꯝꯅ ꯌꯥꯎꯗ꯭ꯔꯤꯁꯦ ꯀꯃꯥꯏꯅ ꯇꯧꯔꯤꯅꯣ ꯑꯦꯝ ꯁꯤ ꯑꯦꯅ ꯌꯥꯝꯅ ꯀꯩꯅꯣ ꯑꯣꯏꯅ ꯔꯤꯒꯨꯂꯔ ꯑꯣꯏꯕ ꯍꯦꯜꯂꯤ ꯑꯦꯝ ꯑꯦꯁ ꯁꯤ ꯑꯥꯏ ꯇꯤꯒꯤ ꯃꯤꯁꯤꯡꯗꯣ ꯅꯣꯏ ꯃꯁꯦꯟ ꯄꯥꯎ ꯐꯥꯎꯅꯧ ꯌꯥꯎꯅꯕ ꯍꯣꯠꯅꯧ ꯅꯣꯏ ꯀꯩꯒꯤꯅꯣ ꯅꯣꯏ ꯑꯍꯨꯝ ꯃꯔꯤꯈꯛ ꯌꯥꯎꯔꯤꯁꯦ ꯃꯊꯪꯒꯤ ꯀ꯭ꯂꯥꯁꯇꯗꯤ ꯐꯖꯅ ꯌꯥꯎꯅꯕ ꯃꯁꯦꯟ ꯄꯥꯎ ꯐꯥꯎꯅꯀꯣ ꯃꯦꯝꯅ ꯀꯩꯒꯤꯅꯣ ꯑꯦꯝ ꯑꯦꯁ ꯁꯤ ꯑꯥꯏ ꯇꯤ ꯃꯤ ꯌꯥꯝ ꯌꯥꯎꯗꯦ ꯍꯥꯏꯌꯦꯅ ꯀꯩꯒꯤꯅꯣ ꯍꯥꯏꯌꯦꯅ ꯍꯥꯏꯌꯨꯀꯣ ꯅꯣꯏ ꯒ꯭ꯔꯨꯞ ꯅꯣꯏ ꯇꯣꯉꯥꯟꯕ ꯁꯦꯄꯔꯦꯠ ꯒ꯭ꯔꯨꯞ ꯂꯩꯅꯩ ꯅꯠꯇ꯭ꯔꯣ
ꯂꯩꯌꯦ ꯃꯦꯝ
ꯑꯝꯇ ꯍꯥꯏꯌꯨ ꯃꯦꯝꯅ ꯀ꯭ꯂꯥꯁ ꯌꯥꯎꯗꯦ ꯀꯩꯒꯤꯅꯣ ꯑꯩꯗꯤ ꯍꯌꯦꯡ ꯀ꯭ꯂꯥꯁ ꯌꯥꯎꯗꯗꯤ ꯅꯣꯏ ꯀꯩꯅꯣ ꯇꯧꯔꯣꯏꯀꯣ ꯑꯣꯟꯂꯥꯏꯟꯗ ꯐꯅ ꯀ꯭ꯂꯥꯁ ꯇꯧꯕ ꯈꯣꯠꯄ ꯑꯦꯇꯦꯟꯗꯦꯟꯁ ꯑꯃ ꯂꯥꯛꯈꯤꯅꯤ ꯑꯗꯣ ꯑꯩ ꯍꯌꯦꯡ ꯀ꯭ꯂꯥꯁ ꯌꯥꯎꯗꯕ ꯃꯤꯗꯤ ꯑꯩꯗꯤ ꯃꯥꯔꯛ ꯄꯤꯔꯣꯏꯀꯣ ꯇꯁꯦꯡꯅ ꯑꯩ ꯍꯥꯏꯔꯤꯁꯤꯅꯤ ꯅꯣꯏ ꯌꯥꯝ ꯂꯥꯏꯠ ꯑꯣꯏꯅꯁꯨ ꯂꯧꯒꯅꯨ ꯍꯥꯏꯕꯗꯤ ꯅꯣꯏ ꯄꯩꯈꯥ ꯂꯣꯏꯅꯃꯛ ꯑꯣꯟꯂꯥꯏꯟꯗ ꯀꯩꯅꯣ ꯀꯣꯔꯣꯅꯥ ꯇꯧꯋꯦꯅ ꯑꯣꯟꯂꯥꯏꯟꯗ ꯇꯧꯋꯦꯅ ꯌꯥꯝ ꯂꯥꯏꯠ ꯑꯣꯏꯅꯁꯨ ꯂꯧꯒꯅꯨ ꯀꯣꯔꯣꯅꯥ ꯍꯥꯡꯇꯣꯛꯈ꯭ꯔꯗꯤ ꯀꯣꯔꯣꯅꯥꯁꯦ ꯈꯔ ꯐꯥꯗꯣꯛꯈ꯭ꯔꯗꯤ ꯅꯣꯏ ꯑꯣꯐꯂꯥꯏꯟꯗ ꯄꯩꯈꯥ ꯇꯧꯔꯛꯇꯣꯏꯅꯤꯀꯣ ꯑꯗꯨ ꯈꯪꯖꯧ ꯅꯁꯥꯅ ꯌꯥꯝ ꯂꯥꯏꯠ
ꯍꯣꯏ
ꯑꯣꯏꯅꯁꯨ ꯂꯧꯒꯅꯨ
ꯎꯝ
ꯌꯥꯔꯦ ꯌꯥꯔꯦ ꯅꯣꯏ ꯔꯣꯜ ꯅꯝꯕꯔꯁꯤꯡ ꯊꯥꯔꯛꯑꯣ ꯑꯗꯨꯒ ꯅꯣꯏ ꯃꯁꯦꯟ ꯍꯥꯏꯅꯧ ꯀ꯭ꯂꯥꯁ ꯌꯥꯎꯅꯕ ꯇꯧ ꯑꯩ ꯑꯗꯨꯒ ꯅꯣꯠꯁꯦ ꯍꯧꯖꯤꯛ ꯀꯩꯅꯣ ꯇꯧꯔꯛꯑꯒꯦ ꯁꯦꯌꯔ ꯇꯧꯔꯛꯑꯒꯦ ꯃꯨꯗꯜꯁꯇ ꯅꯣꯏ ꯑꯗ ꯌꯦꯡꯉꯣ ꯐꯔꯦ ꯐꯔꯦ ꯁꯤ ꯂꯣꯏꯁꯤꯜꯂꯁꯤ ꯉꯁꯤꯒꯤꯗꯤ ꯔꯣꯜ ꯅꯝꯕꯔꯁꯤꯡ ꯊꯥꯔꯛꯑꯝꯃꯣ ꯍꯌꯦꯡ ꯑꯩꯒꯤ ꯀ꯭ꯂꯥꯁ ꯅꯣꯏꯒꯤ ꯄꯨꯡ ꯀꯩꯅꯣꯗ 12ꯗ ꯂꯩꯕ꯭ꯔꯥ ꯂꯣꯏ ꯊꯣꯛꯑꯕ ꯅꯣꯏ ꯂꯣꯏꯅꯃꯛ
ꯊꯣꯛꯇ꯭ꯔꯤꯌꯦ ꯃꯦꯝ
12ꯗ ꯂꯩꯕꯗꯣ 12ꯗꯗꯤ ꯑꯩ ꯍꯌꯦꯡ 12ꯗ ꯇꯧꯕ ꯉꯝꯃꯣꯏꯌꯦꯕꯀꯣ
ꯑꯧ
ꯄꯨꯡ ꯀꯩꯅꯣꯗ ꯇꯧꯁꯦ ꯁꯨꯝ 1:30ꯗ ꯇꯧꯁꯦ ꯑꯩ 13:30ꯗ ꯀ꯭ꯂꯥꯁ ꯑꯃꯁꯨ ꯂꯩ ꯑꯗꯨꯗꯨꯅ 1:30ꯗ ꯇꯧꯁꯦ
ꯌꯥꯏ ꯃꯦꯝ
ꯌꯥꯏ ꯌꯥꯏ